Here's what we're going to do. I'm going to go through the content really quickly. And hopefully at the end, we will have some time to look into some stuff in action. Okay. I'm not going to talk about myself. You can look up on LinkedIn. And by the way, connect on LinkedIn. Would love that. And if any questions comes up in your mind, and if you cannot, get them through during the session, because I'm not sure if we're going to have time for that, feel free to reach out on Twitter or LinkedIn and drop me your question, and I will try to answer after the session as soon as I can. Okay, so let's start with the world today. I'm sure this is what you have heard all day. Things all around have changed rapidly. And again, if you haven't noticed, AI is everywhere, and organizations are already investing into ways to adapt. If you look back just a few years, we saw that organizations that had already invested in their digital transformation and digital foundation were able to weather that disruption of the pandemic better than their peers, with many of them emerging even stronger than before. So I believe we are at a similar inflection point today. The pressure is really high, but it's kind of different. After years of disruption driven by the pandemic during the recent years, industries and organizations are continuing to transform much more quickly. So sometimes this feels a little bit painful, but there is a lot of opportunity behind it as well. But again, like no technology before it, the advances in AI are augmenting our ability, whether you're a developer or organizational leader. It's increasing our ability to think, reason in some sense, learn, and express ourselves. And I believe that AI provides that unique set of benefits that can be realized by any organization in any sector. So, okay, let's jump. So, a slide deck without some stats wouldn't be a slide deck, right? So this is a recent study I just wanted to share about, from MIT Sloan Management Review, actually, that says 87% of leaders believe AI will give their organization a competitive edge. So this kind of proves the amount of investment that is already coming or will be coming soon into the area. The question everyone is asking themselves right now is this: how will your organization seize the full potential of AI while still safeguarding the business, the data, and the employees? And when we look at this, the whole thing isn't that much of a different. But let's talk about kind of the elephant in the room. The operationalization. Every time I say this, I kind of try to be very careful so that I don't mispronounce it. The operationalization, there you go. Again, you got it. This is the crux of our discussion today. Even after overcoming the challenges of starting, developing, evaluating generative AI, which a lot of organizations are kind of on that state, and that's perfectly fine. But once you're skip that, once you're done with, again, starting, developing, and evaluating the technology itself, and have some kind of a Gen AI, business flow that proves value for your organization, the journey is actually far from over, and that's actually when you notice that there's a lot of way to go. So what is it? So bringing these solutions to life in a real-world environment involves navigating through the maze that we're kind of familiar with from previous technological implementations, which is, classic stuff: privacy, security, and grounding. I'm sure you have seen out there a lot of tweets and stuff. There are cases like, I remember this tweet. I guess this was a car dealer in the US. I don't specifically remember the brand, right? That's not the topic. But the thing is, on Twitter, a lot of people started sharing screenshots from their online chatbot that was powered by, GPT, I suppose. And people were able to ask that chatbot to build up, to generate Python code. Okay. So that kind of is funny, but the moment your own chatbot on your own website starts suggesting your competitors' products, it gets into a weird territory, to be honest. Even though you might underline it saying, hey, this is AI generated, whatever, kind of trying to not take that much responsibility, it's still damaging to the brand in that case. So oh my, this was definitely not the right word to choose for this slide deck. So operationalization is where the theory meets actually the practice. It's where developers and organizations must arm themselves with the right tools and expertise, not just to craft a proof of concept, but to scale these solutions responsibly. The ultimate goal is seamless transition from a controlled experiment setting, a proof of concept, to a production environment where generative AI can truly show its worth and maintain it. So, what are we talking about? So consider MLOps. I'm sure some of you are familiar with the concept of MLOps, aligning people, processes, and platform across the org, from IT to data science team, to deliver business value from machine learning. It's a practice that we have been working on for at least a couple of years now. It's essentially for teams to build their own strategies on how they streamline the people and the processes to best match with the MLOps platform they choose. From technical standpoint, MLOps is about bringing DevOps principles to the ML workflow, using continuous integration approaches to the data science workflow by automating training the model, testing the model, and using CD, continuous development, to automate the test and deployment of production-ready models. Of course, it's also important to monitor the kicking off the retraining pipelines as model performance decays over time. So those are all stuff that we kind of got exposed during the last couple of years, right? The key here, in the case of MLOps, is to the repeatability and the consistency of the process, making sure it's well understood by the internal teams and repeatable by others, and can aid in the process of verifying correctness. So how does those needs and the practices align with today's LLM ops? So the evolution of MLOps to LLM ops is something we know a lot of organizations struggle with, because obviously it's new. Building and managing an LLM app today, first off, not everyone is in that territory, and that's why I wanted to talk about this topic so that we get ready. But it can feel like a bespoke process, combining models, open source frameworks, open source models, and manually connecting data sources. For many, it isn't scalable. And honestly, a lot of the teams right now are looking for guidance for how their existing MLOps can be augmented to cover these new workflows. Or otherwise, if they're coming from scratch, they're simply trying to understand how to run from POC to production. So while generative AI introduces new uses, techniques, and challenges to MLOps, teams can actually build on their existing MLOps tools and practices as well. They're not starting from scratch. For example, pipelines will still be important. Experimentation and tests will also be important. So it may come, more naturally to data scientists than developers at first. And the whole LLM thing, especially if you're not doing maybe fine tuning, is bringing that MLOps game a little bit closer to developers, and machine learning and data scientists, and all that thing under the AI umbrella is getting more and more mixed up, let's say. So what is critical in this new workflow is that enterprises have control such that they can implement the safeguards businesses require. We have to make sure, in the case of an MLOps, it was primarily about the accuracy. But now we got accuracy, similarity as quality metrics. We got bias and toxicity, the groundness aspect. Cost is a huge one, by the way, especially if you're using an LLM as a service. And obviously latency. You're reaching out to in the case you're using a cloud environment, which most of the time you are. So the latency is another factor that we have to think about. And these are not just initial evaluations that we have to think about. These are ongoing worries that we have to keep in mind all the time and retest, maintain, and ensure we are always safe from all these metrics, not just on the initial, production deployment, but ensure that the production environment is always monitored from all these aspects. Okay, so how does this whole thing look like? So this is a little bit of a maybe too granular cycle, but I am sure when you look at this step by step, you're gonna see that you ever are on one part of this where you started and you have been through the journey maybe halfway, or you are already throughout the progress. So what we have here, let's talk about a couple of pieces. Foundational LLM is about, you select Azure OpenAI, Llama, Falcon, or whatever. You get that, right? Then you have to bring in your own data and services. Retrieval augmented generation is one part of it. And obviously with retrieval augmented generation, what you are trying to do is to deliver value to the end business, but we are not there yet. So on top of that, we start using prompt engineering practices. So we increase the quality of the output that we have. And finally, this cycle, we do experiment with this cycle, right? We do evaluate its result. And these experiments, a lot of the time, require either changes in the, let's say, the data that we bring in as part of the retrieval augmented generation, or in the prompts that we built. So we always kind of like, hyperparameter configuration. We always try to, fine tune the prompts to increase the quality. We fine tune how we have designed the data and services integration. And we experiment the cycle and evaluate to see what type of changes, effects it has on the result when we do these changes. And this is the experimentation cycle that I just referred to in a previous slide that we are kind of used to in the ML ops situation. That kind of makes me think that, do we have something like AutoML for LLM ops? I'm not sure yet. Anyways, let's move. So once we are done with the experimentation and evaluation, then comes, the CI, the C, and CD. So what is CE, by the way? So CI/CD is something we are used to. What is that C and E in between? Continuous integration and continuous development. In between, we have continuous evaluation. So why would I need to do continuous evaluation? Most probably my prompts are static, but my data is not. And when my data changes, it will affect the quality of my results. The data structure might change. And when I say structure, this isn't about, JSON versus XML or whatever like that. No. So let's say you have fine-tuned your text chunking for retrieval augmented generation on a specific type of data. You were using some PDF files. And the PDF files, I'm just going to make up something right now. So the PDF files have some financial data. So now you have new documents coming in, and the content of these documents are totally different. The semantic distribution in document is different. So that means you might need to change your chunking strategy. As simple as maybe you're going to change your chunk sizes or overlap. It can be as simple as that. But the question is, how will you figure out that the changes that happened on the data layer actually affected your quality, your output quality? So that requires continuous evaluation. And continuous evaluation helps with whenever you have a new version of the foundational LLM, it's crazy easy to change that. You just change the, version header and you are done. Hopefully no one does that. But still, if you have a continuous evaluation pipeline, what you can do is as simple as, hey, do we need to run the whole experimentation evaluation? No, I can just run the evaluation with the new model, see the success. I can actually fall back and maybe even decide to run with a cheaper model and see how much the quality changes, and then decide to jump into a cheaper but newer model. And that does happen actually. Just a couple of weeks ago, we got new models that are more capable and much cheaper in terms of embedding, right? So finally, when we complete the whole thing, we got the deployment, the inferencing, and the monitoring of the situation as well, in the monitoring of the performance metrics for your LLM flow, detecting data drifts, communicating the model's performance to even stakeholders. Okay, perfect. So, okay, we kind of understand why we need those. I have put a couple of slides in here with the intention to get those slides to you. I knew I'm not playing out of this. Trust me. I knew I'm not going to be able to cover everything in the slide deck. Still, I wanted to put it in there for you as study notes, whatever. So instead of you taking notes, I prepped you some notes and put it into the slide deck so that you can take it out instead of just the stuff that I can cover in a 25 minutes interval, let's say. Okay. So we want to operationalize. LLM Ops is obviously complex. You see the design and development square up there. So we have a huge flow that comes in, and we have to manage all of these different steps and flows, ideally on a visual environment. Because it's not just with a single LLM, by the way. Let me jump to my next slide. It starts from prompt engineering. It gets into combining multiple LLMs as well, because you might want to use different LLM engines, different LLM models for different needs, or combine them together to bring better results. So prompt engineering projects is one of the things we can use with PromptFlow. By the way, I don't have a separate slide about PromptFlow. PromptFlow, I know this slide make it sounds like is an Azure service or whatever. It's an open source project. You can download PromptFlow, use it on your own machine. You can deploy it wherever you want. Obviously, if you come to Azure, you get a hosted version of it. But PromptFlow itself, it's just an open source project. Okay. So I'm going to go a little bit quickly here so that I can do a demo. So you can obviously, again, back here, prompt engineering, what does it mean? Crafting the prompt, testing it, evaluating, and so on and so forth. Flow orchestration, hey, I have multiple, like LangChain and semantic kernel. I want to bring those in and orchestrate in a visual manner and try to understand what's happening. Because this is essentially me working in front of a portal, trying to test and come up with a flow that makes sense and that brings value, right? Instead of sitting down, and you can do it there, and you can see, you do see in this screenshot as well, there are sections where you can actually bring in Python code and stuff. But ideally, I want to have a workspace where I can work and bring all of these pieces as easily as possible and do A/B testing as well, if I wanted to do, or run a test that can test different variants of prompts and models in a single shot. Okay, so integration management is another one, right? When you're building a flow, essentially, you do integrate with multiple, services. You have a vector database, you have maybe some other Safety system, you have some custom, Python code that you have coded yourself in order to connect to third-party systems. Sometimes those are, function calls. Sometimes those are skills from other platforms, and you have to have somewhere to be able to manage all that. So the tooling PromptFlow tries to help this on this front as well. So finally, LLM tuning. Variants really help on this one. You can create dynamic prompts using data sets that you have. That really changes the game. So you have a data set that you want to run through an LLM flow to test what type of different results you're going to have. So you can do that through the PromptFlow, quickly bring in your data. You can quickly tune your prompts. That's what we're talking about at this point, and your LLM configuration with variations. So prompt evaluation is another one. That's really something that I really love, by the way, because at the core of it, without being able to evaluate the quality of the result, and you might right now you might be saying like, hey, what does quality mean? Let me show you. No, I'm not going to answer that question, but I will show you something. So here I am on Azure AI Studio. I am in the PromptFlow section, okay? Oh, by the way, I'm going to have to go to the compute. And because I will be running PromptFlow in Azure, in this case, not locally, I have to start my compute cluster first. And it looks like I forgot to start it before the session, because there's a nice thing in Azure. If you don't use the cluster for an hour, it just suspends, so you don't pay for it. Okay. Anyways, we don't have to run it right now. We don't have, I knew we wouldn't have the time. So I run it before the session, actually yesterday. And I'm going to show you the UI here. Here's what's happening here. I got an input. I wanted to keep this simple. This is actually able to handle, conversations, but I wanted to keep this single, which means we have a single question coming in and we will respond to that with retrieval augmented generation. So what did I do? I said, okay, there's going to be a question that's going to come up as a string, okay? And the output will be an answer. It's going to go into the chat output. Cool. So what else do I need? First off, I'm going to create an embedding because I'm going to do a retrieval augmented generation. I'm going to do a vector database lookup. First, I have to create the embedding. Because I have the proper connections to my Azure OpenAI service, I'm going to use a model from Azure OpenAI. I selected that service. I added that service through my connection manager. I selected my deployment name, and I said, okay, the inputs question will go here as an input. The output, I will take that. It will assign it to a variable. So what I'm going to do is, let me go here. Okay, the order of the boxes here doesn't matter. The order is pretty nicely shown on the graph on the right-hand side. So I'm going to do a lookup. This is my vector database from Azure. I've already connected it to my workspace. Okay, so I'm just giving it the name. And then I'm saying, hey, this is the index I'm going to use. And please get the output of the embedding and pass it to the vector database. That's it. So the result of this lookup will be assigned to a embed variable. Okay, here we are. Embed output down here. Okay. So what I do finally here is that I'm going to create a chat. And I'm going to go, hey, I have a system prompt. And then please loop through the embeds that have been looked up and found, right? And type the original content here, inject it as part of the prompt so that we do retrieval augmented generation. And finally, put the question that originally came in. So I'm pulling a variable from the original box up here, right? I did the lookup. And if you look at the diagram on the right-hand side, you're going to see input, question goes to the chat. Meanwhile, it goes to the embed, lookup, results coming into the chat, and then you get the output. Okay. And when I say evaluate this, what I can do is I can bring in my data set, which I already uploaded. This is a CSV file with questions and answers. Okay. I want to run these questions and the answers, and then compare the answer that I have in this CSV file versus the answer that I got from the LLM output, flow output. And when I do that, I got a couple of out-of-the-box comparison models. That, I mean, in this case, this is GPT-based. So I'm going back to the GPT and asking, how do they compare, right? You can implement your own evaluation flow as well. When we run this, here's what we see. We can export the output, but I'm going to show you that on the portal. I'm going to go here. Oops. View outputs. Okay. Here's what I'm seeing. The input question, the input truth, and the actual answer, and how similar they were. This is something between 1 to 5. 5 is very similar. 1 is not similar. So all of my, all of the data in the CSV file has been passed through that flow, and I have my results. And I'm able to deploy this, make it part of the CI/CD pipeline, and so on and so forth. So that's kind of, a 2 minutes demo. And again, I have a bunch of additional slides and resources for you at the end of the deck. Go to these links if you are looking to learn more about PromptFlow. Again, it's an open source project. You can run it locally as well if you wanted to. I'm just lazy. I got it from my Azure portal. That's pretty much it.